All right. Well, good afternoon, everybody. I am going to call this meeting of the Altadena Library District Board of Trustees Budget Committee to order. It is Thursday, May 5th at 1 p.m. on Zoom. Thanks so much to all of you who are joining us. We'll do a quick roll call of our trustees, and we have, of course, a lot of guests with us today to help us on a variety of items. So, Trustee Wilkerson.
I'm here.
And I am here as well, so we are good to go. Any agenda items we need to move around or change? Okay, then I'm going to go ahead and move that we adopt the agenda.
Seconded. All
right, perfect. As with all of our virtual meetings, we will do a roll call vote on every vote. So, Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And I vote for me. Do we have any public comment on anything at all? Okay.
Did we receive any? No? Oh, you're on mute. I'll double check that.
I don't see any public comments.
No. Okay.
Okay. All right.
I haven't received any, no.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you so much. So at this point, I'm going to...
I haven't received any comments, no.
Okay. Thank you. At this point, I'm going to read our land acknowledgement into the record. The Altadena Library District acknowledges its presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Gabrielina Tongva peoples. Altadena is located on the stolen homelands of the Hahamunga tribal band. The traditional territory of the Gabrielina Tongva is referred to as Tovangar, which includes the areas currently known as Los Angeles County, Riverside County, West San Bernardino County, parts of Orange County, as well as the 4 Southern Channel Islands. Entities such as the United States government and non-native settlers have subjected the Gabrielina Tongva peoples to historic and continuing injustices, including genocide, forced displacement, and cultural and linguistic erasure. The Altadena Library District commits to learning, educating, and informing its staff and residents of present day about the rich histories, vibrant communities, and culture of the Gabrielina Tongva people, both present and past. Okay, in our business for today, we have a whole lot of stuff. First off, in our consent calendar, we've got some minutes from our last meeting. This was the Budget Committee meeting that was held on February 3rd. Do I hear a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
Okay, and I'll second. We'll take a roll call vote. I'm gonna do this a lot today, but there's only 2 of us. That's how it goes. Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And I vote for me. All right, no unfinished business, so we come right into our new business. And first up today is the review of our new unfunded accrued liability policy. This begins on page 6 of your package, if you're following along. And I'm gonna have, I think, Nikki, do you want to give a quick summary of this item before we dive into some questions?
Sure, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Nice to see everyone. I am excited that we basically within 6 months were connected with Cal Muni, and we do have Andrew Flynn here today, so I'll pass it off to him momentarily, where he and I attended a presentation about the benefits of developing an unfunded accrued liability policy. Brought that idea to the Budget Committee in February and then got approval from the board at their meeting on February 28th. Since that time, Ian from Ide Bailey, Andrew, myself, and Anna Villalobos, our new office manager, met 2 or 3 times to review the policy, make some changes to it, and now have the draft to present to the Budget Committee for your review and approval. Andrew is here. Being that we already presented about this in February, I wasn't sure how much detail you want to go into about the policy itself, but he's here to answer questions. And yeah, we're just excited to get one of these on the books and come up with a plan to try to start paying down that unfunded accrued liability.
Awesome, thank you. Andrew, is there anything you want to sort of tell us at the top here, or do you want to dive right into Q&A?
No, I really don't have anything specific to add. I would just say, okay, again, the kind of core goal, of of the policy, as Nikki said, is really to build a long-term plan, to manage these liabilities going out into the future, right? It's not about paying it off like all in one lump. It's about, what's the diligent strategy to keep the district, in a place where unfunded liabilities don't become too big of a budgetary challenge in the long term. So this is really about fiscal responsibility long term.
Right. Okay. I've got a couple of questions I was hoping we could touch on. Camila, do you have anything? Do you want me to get going and then if something? Okay, perfect.
Yep, thank you.
Of course. So first of all, I think overall this looks great. Obviously, before we send to the board, there's a couple of proofreading things, but I'm not even going to talk about them today. There's some sections where things have numbers and other things don't. Not critical. What I wanted to dive into was two things. One, I want to talk about our incremental funding level objectives and just understand sort of the rationale for those particular benchmarks as well as the time span. And then I also wanted to talk about pension obligation financing and explore that a little bit, as well as some of the sequestered savings pieces. So that's kind of where I'm looking at. Overall, I think it all looks great. I just want to make sure, especially when we go to the board at the end of the month, that I understand all these pieces because I'm not sure I do. So can we start with the funding level objectives? This is on page 11 of the package, section 2-1.
So the idea here is there's really two approaches. One is you could, which we will get to in a bit, is the pension financing strategy, which is to hit a target from day one.
Mm-hmm.
Or the other approach is to incrementally have a plan to build over time toward a funding target. Ultimately, the plan contemplates getting to a minimum of 90%. But again, we want to have a process within which the district isn't overcommitting to trying to pay too much. It's about recognizing that this is a process that's going to take some time. The market is going to change, right? There are variables that we can't control. So how do we create a structure that's going to allow you flexibility to move toward that target over a rational period of time, not too aggressive, but also not too slow. So that is why we kind of settled in at that range. And again, you're going to have time to get there is really the main goal, because you don't want to try to overcommit up front.
Right. If I recall from some of the charts and the trend lines that we looked at last time we spoke, there was a real kind of steep rise, a peak, and then a fall off. Correct. So assuming that model remains consistent with these incremental funding levels, are we basically, let me try to say this in the way that makes most sense, are we basically trying to figure out how to kind of amortize those costs of that steep rise over that period between now and 2031? Or does the incremental funding level approach envision that reaching those benchmarks will require substantially more?
It will require additional payments.
Right.
Okay. So again, so remember that curve is as of your most recent report, which came out last summer. We know that currently, that in the coming report, so the one that's coming out in July of this year, you will see a very large decrease in the unfunded liabilities because CalPERS had a very good year last year. So that dome is going to level off to a certain extent. Mm-hmm. What we want to do, though, is we want to make sure that each year you're incrementally stepping further than what you're currently projected to be. And again, CalPERS already builds a timeline out to get you to 100% funded. The problem is it's out in the 2040 range. Right. So it's more expensive. So what we want to do is we want to get you on a path that's a little bit more quick. So it is about making more additional discretionary payments where you can. Right. Above and beyond what CalPERS says you have to pay. Right. That makes a lot of sense to me. Is it the case that this
incremental funding process with the additional payments, is that something that is sort of an either or with this debt issuance idea, or are those things that work in concert? I wasn't totally clear on what the interaction between those were.
Sure. Yeah, no, this all does work in concert.
Okay.
So even, well, let's step to the refinancing,
Yeah.
idea. The kind of the core concept there is you can borrow money in the capital markets or from a bank at taxable rates. Again, so you guys just went through a financing which was tax exempt because you're a tax exempt entity.
Mhm.
However, the IRS says that if you're going to finance pension obligations, it has to be taxable. So you'll
Okay.
be borrowing taxable rates, and knowing that the market is moving around quite a bit right now.
Right.
Despite that, taxable rates that you could likely borrow at now are lower than the 6.8% that you are obligated to pay under CalPERS.
Mhm.
Right. That's the core premise of the whole idea: is
Of the whole
borrow
deal.
money,
Yeah.
pay down CalPERS, pay a loan and loan back instead. The idea, additionally, is that you fund up to your ultimate funding target or even above that. Right. I work with agencies who say our funding target is 93%, but we want to go to 100.
Mhm.
Right. Because again, they know that it's going to fluctuate over time. So they are basically paying down CalPERS and then paying a loan instead. That said, each year, regardless of whether you refinance or not, each year is going to happen and you might get more unfunded liability.
Right.
But again, the goal is that if you're at your funding target, you don't want to pay more than that.
Right.
If you're at 90% and you funded at 90%, then leave it alone, pay your normal costs, pay your only enough to keep you at 90%. If you have
Okay.
additional money above and beyond that, that's where 115 trust comes into play.
Got it. Okay.
Before I get to the 115
Yeah.
trust, what we will do going forward is we will look at each individual base within your plans and say, where should you be paying additional proceeds, right? What's going to start to level out your payment structure so you don't have that big dome, right? We want to keep you at a relatively level, structure for that additional, the UAL that stays outstanding. So each year we're going to go in and look at it. We're going to say, okay, where are you? What's your funded status? And then if you have more to pay, right, then we say, okay, where are you going to pay it? Which one of these structures that is in there are we going to pay to make sure that your structure stays as level as possible?
Right. Okay, this makes sense, right? Because it might be the case that we get some random grant that picks up a bunch of operations costs, and so then we've got a little bit of a budget surplus, and it's great, we can pay it out of that. We don't have to borrow any money. Fine.
Right.
Okay.
And that's exactly it. And again, remember, refinancing is a viable strategy. It's not the most affordable. The most affordable strategy is always use cash on hand.
Right. Well, and I will confess, the first time I read through this policy, I had a little heart attack just on my own. I was like, oh my God, we can't take out more debt. We already have a bond. And then I read it again. And I was like, okay, it's fine. It's fine. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
That's very helpful.
That's really important, right? This is a policy that's intended to be here for the next 40 years.
Right.
So it's not about do this now. It's about have this toolkit so that each year you ask the questions. Right?
I think that's very helpful. Yeah. I wonder if just in sort of thinking about, yes, this is a policy that's going to be here forever. I wonder if in section 2, before we take this to the board, it might be worth being a little bit more explicit about the idea that hey, these are all approaches you can take. You can take all of them, none of them, one of them, various ones at various times. This is sort of your mix and match list of options to deal with managing this debt. Because now that you've said that, that makes a lot of sense. I think in reading the policy, I don't know, Camila, if you felt this way, but in reading the policy, it wasn't totally clear to me that that was the case.
Yeah, we can definitely do that. I mean, that's,
I think that would be helpful. It's just a little bit of language, but I think it would be helpful in especially in communicating to the board. Look, we're not saying do this, right? That's not the point of this. The policy is just here's the universe of options you have, and then each year we'll make a recommendation that's specific on in terms of market conditions. Okay. So we've talked, I feel good about the pension obligation financing. That makes sense. Okay. Can we talk about this section 115 thing?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so the idea here is that the IRS provides a framework within which you can create a trust fund to set aside monies that are specifically for pension costs.
Mhm.
Okay. When you put money into those a 115 trust, you are committing those monies to pay pension costs in the future. You can't use them for anything else.
Right. Okay.
However, you also can invest at a higher risk profile than you generally can under general government code. Right. So basically you can go higher on the risk curve, which means you get higher interest rates.
Sure.
So think of
Hopefully.
it as, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, that's the benefit. That's the
Right.
trade-off. You're committing the money, but you're getting higher interest returns.
Right.
I tend to think of this as you're investing money in something equivalent to CalPERS.
Hmm.
So say 6.8% on average, as
Oh,
opposed to LAIF, right?
which is like super, yeah.
Exactly.
Criminal.
So
Yeah.
you don't want to commit all of your money there.
Yeah.
This isn't a replacement for CalPERS. CalPERS is already doing the work on the majority of your plans, right? You're paying them, they're investing your monies. It's their job to fulfill that 6.8% on monies that they have.
Hmm.
Once you hit your funded target, though, then instead of saying we're going to stop investing in ourselves, that's where you bring the 115 trust into play. Because a 115 trust, if you start putting money into a 115 trust as call it a reserve, what it allows you to do is A, earn higher interest rates than just general reserves, but B, it then becomes a buffer between your general fund and the vagaries of the swings in unfunded liabilities. It's a buffer mechanism. Again, you don't want to use it, at least not heavily, until you hit your funded target, because again, put your money into CalPERS until you hit your funded target. But then if you have a little extra beyond that, then you start building that reserve. And think about it.
Oh, that's so interesting. Okay.
Right. So the idea there is, so imagine you're in the perfect scenario, you're at 90% funded, and you have say 3% more in a 115 trust. And CalPERS has a really good year. Or let's for argument's sake, let's go on the really happy path, and they have 2 really good years.
Okay.
Well, now you've gone from 90% in CalPERS to 100%. And in your 115 trust, you've gone up to, 112%.
Hmm.
So you have way more than enough money.
Right.
So what we do is we say in the 115 trust, you now, because the 115 trust isn't just for unfunded liabilities, it's any pension cost.
Oh, okay.
Right? So now,
okay, I did not understand that. Sorry.
What we
okay.
say in the policy is once you hit a cap, once you hit a top threshold, now you take that excess money and you use it to pay normal costs. It's a way to reward yourself, so to speak.
Well, and you're getting like 6% interest on it, which is killer.
Exactly. So it's one of those balancing acts. Again, you don't want to overinvest in a 115 trust. And I will tell you that there are trust providers who will say, put more money here, not in CalPERS. That's, for me, that's kind of, not the point, right? It's not we're going to try and earn more with these guys. CalPERS is doing a good job. This is that balancing mechanism that says once you are there, because again, ultimately your responsibility is 100%. Right.
Well, and all the money is going to go to CalPERS anyway. Like it's not like it can go anyplace else.
Exactly. But when you have that buffer mechanism, it allows you A, to still have the money there for that obligation, but then B, gives you the flexibility to say, okay, we want a target basis so that we're leveling out our payment structures. We want to, and then if we have excess, then we can pay normal cost as well, which again, you couldn't do that with just a general CalPERS fund. So again, it's that flexibility that you have with the 115 trust. That's why that 115 trust comes into play.
That's cool. That's very cool.
We like it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay,
I did not Andrew Trustee Clark, if I can make a key point to or definition I think Andrew was making, but just so we're clear, is once it goes into CalPERS, those ADPs, they're basically gone. The district doesn't have access, but we have a minimal access to the trust, and that we could almost balance our budget every year and take it out to pay those normal costs that Andrew mentioned, or the minimum payment that's due to CalPERS.
That's really interesting.
It's somewhat accessible, whereas if you put it into actual CalPERS and make that ADP, it's gone and it's towards your UAL. You can't get it back.
That is
right. Exactly.
Yeah,
that's so helpful.
Very good point. We note on page 14, section 4, we define a fiscal hardship in the policy. It says that, that says, look, if you have this 115 trust, even if you haven't hit your threshold, if you need it, the idea is that you can pay normal costs then, and that frees up general fund monies to do other things. Right. So again,
that's so cool.
We don't want to encourage that, right? That it's a relief valve, so to speak.
Yeah.
Right. You don't want to do it every time, because then you deplete the 115 trust and you don't have that reserve there. But in those emergencies where the board deems that there's a fiscal hardship, right, you can say, look, we're going to pay normal cost out of the 115 trust, therefore freeing up the general fund to do other things.
Well, and it makes a lot of sense as well, as you say, to have that buffer. I mean, it basically functions as like a CalPERS reserve, in addition to our real reserve. And that's so helpful, because there may be all kinds of things that happen that we don't have any control over in the way that we could control other costs.
Exactly.
Okay. Let me go through my list and see what else I had a question about. Okay, so just slightly above that in section 3, we're still on the 115 trust. So blah, 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 blah. So there's this 110% cap. And so it sounds like that, if I'm understanding this correctly, basically whatever we owe, right, on unfunded liability, I think I'm going to get this right, we'll find out. We have to have 110% of that in the 115 trust. And if we do anything over that amount, we could use for other, to offset our normal CalPERS payments or do anything else. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the core of the concept, is that each year, right, you're going to come out, a new report comes out and says, what is your total accrued liability, right, for all of your employees? And what we say is, okay, now how much do you have with CalPERS? That's your fund, that will determine your funded percent.
Right.
And then we say, and then in addition, how much do you have in the 115 trust? That then determines how close you are to that cap. So again, if you're at 90% and then you have another 10%, you're at 100%. But if you have 20%, now you're at 110%. And if you're at, and so you see where I'm going.
I do. I'm sorry. Maybe this is a silly question, but is it 110% of the entire liability, or 110% of the delta between of our unfunded piece? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's 110% of the total accrued liability.
Okay.
So what you want to say is that I've got more than enough to fulfill this obligation.
Right.
And the reason we say 110%, because CalPERS can have bad years, right?
Well, sure. Yeah.
Right. So again, they could have a 2% year, and now you generate a bunch of unfunded liability. You want that buffer there to say, okay, we're going to take it out of the 115 trust, and we're going to get us back up to the funded percent, our funded target with CalPERS. So you're basically moving money from the 115 trust to CalPERS, right? And it's again, that's the balancing mechanism. So that's why we say up, the 110%. Again, you might say, why are we going above the total amount we owe? That's why. It gives you
that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. All right. I don't understand what sequestered savings are. Can you walk me through that?
So that is in relation to the concept of doing a refinancing.
Okay.
Okay. So again, generally speaking, and the way the policy frames this is that when you look at doing a refinancing, again, you're going to, borrow lower than what your UAL costs are right now, what they're forecasted to be. So then we say, okay, what is the mechanism to understand your savings? And then therefore sequester some of them to put into a 115 trust. So
savings in the sense that the difference between like the 6.8% return and the market rate that we would borrow the money at.
exactly.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. It's so again, 6.8%. Let's just say you borrowed at 3.5%.
Sure.
What is that? What is the difference?
Right.
Not just at one point in time, right? It's what is that over time? Because you're not actually going to recognize the savings up front.
Right.
You recognize them incrementally over time. So basically what it's saying is that if you're going to do a refinancing, what is the structure that you're going to use to each year say, we're going to put some of those savings into the 115 trust instead of leading them off into other operations.
Wait a minute. So in a refinancing situation, like let's use the example that's in here. Let's say we borrow $5 million. We have to pay back $8 million because cost of issuance and interest and whatever. Why is there, sorry, I'm reading this again. Why is there a difference between the unfunded liability debt service paid off is 8 and the total debt service on the pension obligation? So the debt service on the money we borrow is 7. So it's 7 on 5. What is the 8? Is that how much we owe?
That was what you would have paid otherwise.
Oh, okay. Got it. Okay.
So basically what we're saying is, yeah, you're generating $1 million in savings. How are you going to recognize that?
Right.
And at what level? And again, we always say, again, the board ultimately gets to make the decision at that time, right? How much are we going to commit to putting in savings? But in this case, we said, 50% each year. So because again, it's not a fixed structure. It's not like you can say, okay, it's $50,000 each year. It's like, well, this year it's 20,000 and next year it's 25,000 and then it's 30, right? There's a structure that you're replacing. So you want to take some of those savings, but at the same time, you also don't want to say, take all those savings and put them in 115 trust. You want to recognize that, look, there's additional benefit for other operations as well. So we try to say, look, there's a structure that you want to recognize, and here's a framework to understand what those savings are, and then how to plan for allocating some of that to the 115 trust.
Right. Okay. So the policy, as we've got it here, says basically whatever that amount is, you're doing 50%, or the board can decide a percentage.
Correct.
Right. Okay.
Yes, I again, I mean, this is kind of court democracy, right? I'm a firm believer, right? You can't commit a future board,
right?
So again, there's always got to be that flexibility to note that this is kind of the recommendation. This is a baseline assumption. Knowing that people going in the future will probably say, okay, they said 50%.
Seems reasonable, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. But you also need to recognize that they have ultimate discretion to make that determination.
Right, totally. Okay, that makes sense. What else? I think that's all my questions. That was really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Camila, anything you want to ask about on this one?
No, I don't have any questions. A lot of it, to be honest, I don't understand. But I feel like part of this process is sharing it with the board, who more of them will understand and be able to speak about it. So I don't have any questions at this time.
Okay.
And Katie, I see your formatting issues.
Yeah, whatever.
We'll get that fixed. Yeah,
totally.
We'll get them fixed.
Okay. Just out of curiosity, this is a structural question about I know we're talking about our financial policies later. Is this something that ought to be part of our financial policies? So yes. Will it be part of so it will be a constituent piece of, it'll be Sec 11 or whatever it is.
Yeah, we felt like until it actually got approved by the board, it shouldn't be included. So once the board approves, we'll get it added as another section of the financial policies too.
Perfect. Okay, good. That was
Mhm.
that was the only thing that was confusing me a little bit. All right, so I think this is good. I mean, I also I think it's important that both for the board and for members of the public, this is something that feels a little bit more accessible, maybe than the policy is. I don't know. I'm thinking about your comment, Camila, and also like I'm just wondering if there's a way in which it would be helpful to walk the trustees through this. I know we had them like watch the video and all of that jazz. And I think my question is not whether we should do that, but basically when we should do that, whether it makes more sense to do it now as part of the policy approval process, or whether it makes more sense to do that when we go to the, hey, this is our recommendation for fiscal year 22-23. Like, this is what we think we should do for this year, or maybe both. I don't know.
I was wondering
Is
about
it-
that
Yeah.
myself and not, not sure if it's appropriate to ask, but I just was wondering, just thinking like if each of the sections had like a little summary, like in layman's terms of, what it was saying, but I don't know if that is necessary for other folks. If, I'm not really sure about other people's financial savvy in terms of their ability to understand this, but was a challenge for me just personally. So I would find that helpful, but I don't know if it's overall necessary based on the capabilities of the other trustees and the general public. I don't know if it's necessary for the general public because they entrust us to be able to like decipher this and say like, yeah, this is a good idea, which, overall, I feel like it is a good idea, but the ins and outs of the policy are a little bit more challenging for me personally.
I totally hear that. I think that having like an explainer inside the policy probably is not super consistent with the way most of the policies are written, but I think that it's a really good idea. And I'm wondering if maybe the way we do it is either probably at this coming board meeting, if we have time on the agenda, just maybe ask Andrew or Nikki or somebody to kind of walk through each section in a little presentation. I don't think it needs to be long, but I think just even Andrew, just hearing you explain everything the way you did today, and then, going in and reading it again, I'm like, oh yeah, I totally got it. That makes more sense.
I was wondering if it also would be an option to, I know that the package goes out to the board in advance, but even if there are pieces that like after the other trustees review it, if there are pieces that they don't understand, it's kind of like sitting in our own public comment, these are pieces that I'm going to need some, more explanations on, could be helpful. Or I just really imagine that during the meeting, they will just ask those questions.
I think that's right.
Yeah.
I think that's totally right. And I think, last time I think we asked people to kind of watch the video and say like, hey, look at all this stuff and figure it out. I have a feeling that it might be, I know we've got to do budget stuff this month as well, and we've got a fair amount on the agenda, but even if it's just, 10, 15 minutes, I think it would go a long way to helping people feel like they get what's happening. And then in future, if people have questions, there's something to refer back to where it's like, okay, great. I understand what a 115 trust is. I understand what it exists to do. Does that seem generally reasonable?
Yeah.
Nikki, does that work with our
Yep.
agenda okay.
I mean, I think it's going to be a long meeting, so.
I think it is too. Yeah, I think it's one of those ones where we'll have to bring snacks.
But
okay.
yeah, put your seatbelt on, Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have Andrew there, and I'll talk to him about just like a quick walkthrough of the sections.
Yeah.
And then I think as well, when Catalina and I send out the package, I'll recommend that they view this video too.
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think that would hurt either. So
Yeah, I don't think it would. I don't think it would. And I think that, Camilla, your point is good. And I know, Nikki, you always encourage trustees to do this, but I think it's worth reiterating, especially
Yeah.
for this month. Like,
Mm.
read it early, read it often. If you have questions, like, we can answer some of those ahead of time.
Yeah,
Which
for
would be
sure.
good. Okay, excellent. Then at this point, I feel like I'm good to go ahead and move this forward. Camila, anything else you want to talk about on this one?
No, I mean, I really feel like as a whole, like not going into the specifics of it as a whole, I mean, it feels great and it fits. So I think it's good to go for me
Okay,
to present to the board at least. Yeah.
awesome. All right, then I'm going to ask for a motion that we, as a committee, recommend that the Board of Trustees approve the new unfunded accrued liability policy as it appears.
Oh, seconded. Sorry.
Or you, yeah, no, can you make
Or
the
am
motion?
I
then
need to move? Okay.
Yeah, you got to move. Yeah.
So moved. Sorry, I thought
Okay,
you were.
thanks.
I thought you were
Second.
moving.
Technically, you're not supposed to make the motion when you're the chair. I don't know. Like, probably somebody comes out and says, "Hey, that's tacky." I don't know. You're not supposed to do it. So whatever. All right. Motion been made and properly seconded. We're gonna take a roll call vote. Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And an I vote for me. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, Andrew. This has been very helpful, and it's great to see everything in one place. So thank you to everybody who's worked so hard on this. So.
Yeah, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you all again.
Okay. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right. It is salary schedule time. So we are on item 5B. And this is basically our COLA adjustment to our salary schedule as a whole. And it looks like we're, in light of how inflation is making everybody's life really difficult, we're stepping up to a 5%, or the recommendation is that we step up to a 5% as opposed to a kind of a more standard 2%. Nikki, Anna, Ian, anything you guys want to add on that?
No, I'll just add that we looked at the consumer price index for LA County, and in the last 12 months, cost of living has gone up 8.5%.
Yeah.
So in light of that, when Ian and I were looking at budget prep, he recommended that we explore from like 1% to 5%, and depending on the year and the conditions as to how much we would provide in COLA. I do think it's a necessary 5% this year in light of what you had mentioned. I don't know if Ian, you have anything else.
Yeah, I'll just add a couple things. And first thing, in trustees, I did want to introduce Christy Even. She's been helping me out with you guys and the budget and some of the financial policies as well. If you want to say hi, Christy. I think she's stuck on mute.
Sorry, I mouthed it. You couldn't hear me.
Okay.
Yes, I have been helping and learning quite a bit. Been working with Anna lately to get to know all the figures and did help with some of these. So yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Christy.
Yeah, and I did talk with Nikki about the COLA adjustment here. Obviously, inflation is crazy right now. I don't often recommend my clients to sort of always stay with inflation, but rather kind of develop guidelines or borders, like Nikki said, a floor of maybe 1 or 2% up to maybe 5%. So when it gets crazy, you don't exceed that 5%, but there could be recessionary times where salaries still get adjusted a bit and people stay happy, but you can't really take a COLA away. So I think it keeps it consistent without over-promising into the future.
And I guess I will also point out, we brought this for your recommendation first, and the proposed budget, which is the next item, builds in this 5%.
Mm-hmm.
So we felt like we needed to have your recommendation ahead of looking at the full, because if for some reason we're not going to agree to the 5%, we'll need to make adjustments to the proposed budget as well. But
Right,
just so you know, the 5% is what is built into the proposed budget as well.
Mm-hmm. So I guess,
I had a question.
yeah, please go ahead.
So the schedule the schedule that you all sent on page 17, this is the reworked overall schedule with the 5% built into it. So basically, let's say that a new person joined the library district, then they would be based on this schedule. Basically all the salaries get shifted 5% due to the COLA, not just the salaries of the current staff, the whole salary structure.
Mhm.
Okay.
And if someone were to start with us before July 1, 2022, they'd be on the old schedule, but everyone starting July 1st would move into this range.
So that person, if they started before that date, they would stay on they wouldn't get a COLA because they weren't with us before. They wouldn't be,
No, they will
qualify. Oh, they will.
Everybody will adjust July 1st.
Okay.
New and current staff. I'm just saying, like, if someone were to start in May or June, they would be based on our salary schedule that expires June 30th, but then
Mhm.
July 1 would fall
Everybody
into the
shifts.
5%. Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it. That was the only question I had on that one.
So I guess my only question is, I mean, I really hear what you're saying, Ian, about a sort of, reasonable approach over time, knowing that market conditions will shift. But I guess what would be the fiscal impact if we went more than 5%? If we were looking at 6, 7, something, even 8%, because in some ways, I mean, if cost of living and inflation goes up 8.5% and your salary goes up 5%, you're taking a 3% pay cut. You know what I mean? Like in some ways. And not that I think, we can solve all the problems in the world, but I'm just curious to know, what would that do to our budget?
I don't think it would be a huge impact on the bottom line for 1 year. It's just that you have to remember that when you put a 5% this year, or a 6 or 7 or 8 or whatever it is, then next year you'll be increasing on top of that 8. So that's kind of the idea, is that, we're in this hyperinflationary time where CPI is 8%, but you're hearing talks about a recession where it could be negative, and you're not going to reduce salaries at that point. So I don't think, to answer your question, the impact on 1 year isn't really a massive between 1-2% difference. It's not a massive difference on your bottom line, probably within $10,000 to $30,000, I want to say, maybe each percent. I'd have to look at the numbers, but you just have to remember that it carries into the future, because we're never going to decrease. We're never going to have a negative 2% COLA if we went into a recessionary time.
Of course.
People's salaries would still get bumped maybe 1%.
Yeah, the 5% is $150,000 fiscal impact. So it's about $30,000 per percentage.
Per point.
That we'd be looking at. Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I guess the reason I'm also thinking about it is, we are a smaller district and we can't always be as competitive as we would like in terms of salaries. And while I hear you that, yes, we're not going to lower people's salary because the market sucks, I feel like in some ways we do have a little bit of we've kind of got the money to do it. Costs are high. That has a real impact on people now. And I don't know, I would, unless it totally messes up our bottom line, I'm not saying that this is something we should do every single year. I mean, if inflation continues to spiral out of control, we can't necessarily absorb all those costs. But I don't know. I think that there's a reasonable argument to be made that we keep pace with inflation in LA County.
I completely agree with you on that case. I'm always here to advise to be, fiscally responsible about the future. So I don't think there's a huge difference between 5 or 6 or 7% now. It's just, it does impact the future. So maybe what we can do is sort of build a scenario, because we do build projections into our budget often and see how that affects future years. But it's a tough scenario right now because CPI is around, I think, 8%.
Yeah.
In that ballpark.
Right.
I think maybe I don't understand what you're saying exactly, Katie, when you say keep pace with the, can
So
you say that
yeah,
over?
so basically what I'm saying is, I'm going to use round numbers because it's easier for me. But if I get paid, $100 and something I need to buy is $10, and with inflation, that is now, the thing I need to buy is now 8% higher, but my salary only goes up 5%. Basically, I'm making less money relative to the things I need to buy, right? So my position in the market as a consumer of things that cost money is weaker because basically costs have gone up, but my wages haven't gone up by as much.
So
Yeah.
so when you say we should keep pace with the market, you're talking about the 8%, that it should be more than the
Yeah.
5%?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm saying that I think that if prices are doing this, wages should also do this. And I think as an employer, we have an opportunity to do that, right? Like, given that it's not going to be a huge, like, it's not going to mean we can't meet our other obligations.
Okay.
I
I
think
thought
that,
you were saying the
yeah.
opposite.
Oh,
I was
no,
like,
no,
wait a
I'm
minute.
team pay people more. Yeah.
Okay.
Because it costs everybody more to live. It costs them more to fill up
Right.
their gas tank. It costs them more to
Okay.
buy food. Like, that's just how it is.
Yeah, I think that the framing, like when you said you're like, or we're a smaller district, I was framing it in like,
Oh, like we're smaller, we can't
we're
do it. No,
right.
no. Yeah.
So, okay. So then Ian, I know you said that you would advise to be fiscally responsible, or whatever the word is that you use. What are your thoughts on that? Could you, now that I understand what Katie was saying, could you repeat what you were saying? Sorry.
I agree with Katie, is that the district isn't in a cash position where it's going to make or break you a percent or two this year. And, you do have the option not to give COLAs in future years too. So it's just, it's really kind of something you assess every year. But if we were in a more difficult position cash wise, I would advise against it, because like Katie was saying, costs go up and your salaries go up, so they could go like this, and then at some point costs probably might come down, but salaries can't come down. So that's just why I advise on the guidelines, sort of the floor and the ceiling, because you could still implement COLA adjustments in future years to keep people happy. Because I think at the same time too, if there's a recessionary time next year and nobody gets a COLA, that's also something that people look at it sucks. So it's better to see something than nothing from a employee standpoint. And I think, just keeping in that range. If you give 8% this year and then we fall into recession, you're probably going to give 0 next year. Whereas the other scenarios kind of give 5 this year, and then you could still give maybe 2 or 3 next year. That's the only other thing I tend to try to look at.
And so, if it was more than the 5 this year, there's no precedent. Basically, you're saying there's no precedent set that it has to be this 5, 8 next year as well, because I see that last year it was 2. Looks like it was 2%. So
right,
it can shift from year to year based on what the market is doing.
Exactly, and that's sort of what I'm trying to say, is this year is such an outlier year,
right?
That next year is not going to be like that, or at least we hope not. You can't really say. So it's all projecting at this point. But it gives you more options next year. If you see the 8 this year and you do the 8, then next year you've got to follow through with whatever happens next year, as opposed to, maybe if you do a 5 or a 6 and then it's 0 or a recessionary next year, you still have a little wiggle room to give another 2 or 3%, and it might keep people happy.
Okay. And I heard you, just to get it again for the record, that financially it would not be a hardship to be able to do that this year. Okay.
Correct. The 5 is already built into the budget, as Nikki said, and each percent or 2 is about $25,000 to $30,000.
30,000, yeah.
So on an annual basis, no for next year, but like I said, just compounding over year after year. Once you build in that 8% next year, you're building, or this year, well, 22, 23, then thereon and forward, you're building on top of that new base.
Right.
Because the whole
2% of
salary
a
is
higher amount. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So I think all that's super reasonable. Given what property values are doing and the way our revenue is looking, I mean, if we were in a situation where it looked like housing prices were going to crash and we were going to get way fewer property tax dollars or something, I'd feel differently. But I feel like homes are out earning people at a pretty dramatic rate right now. And I feel like we have an obligation to pass that on to folks who work for the district. So I would propose that we do 7% this year. I don't know. How do you feel about that, Camila?
I'm fine with that. I feel like if I think it's, to use the best term, a blessing if inflation is so high and we have the ability to support staff make pace with that, then I think that would be wonderful. I just want to make sure that it's because I'm just like, yeah, pay them the money, but I want to make sure that it it makes
we like have it. Yeah.
Yes. So I have no problem with paying, with saying like, yeah, 7%, but I just trying to be cautious about that. So yes,
So
I'm fine with that.
Yeah, it seems to me like if we do, I guess the question then when we move into the next budget item is if we're trying to reduce other lines to make the budget balance, or if we're just going to pull it out of reserves.
I think pull it out of reserves because we're talking about like 60 grand or something like that. We ended up putting more in reserves this year than we kind of anticipated. And I kind of expect that what we're going to see in property tax revenues next year will cover that difference. Yeah. So I don't have a problem with it. Plus we've got like a very healthy reserve. And if there was ever a time to spend it so that people can afford to, buy gas, it's like they're getting paid a fair wage. This is what that's for, I think.
Yeah, I was thinking that, and know that there's some financial policies coming up, and I saw that we're required to keep so much of it, but I would ask if it would be a fair statement to say like this additional 60, not 90, 60, thousand is not going to drain the reserves or even put us close to, being under the limit that we're required to have there.
No.
Okie doke.
All right. So then I'm going to suggest that we send the salary schedule to the board with a 7% increase for their approval. So if I could have a motion to that effect, please.
So moved.
All right, I second. Any other discussion or debate? No, let's take a vote. Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And I vote for me. Awesome.
Hey, I need a quick restroom break. Sorry.
Yeah, let's take a quick break.
Okay.
All right, let's take 5. We'll be right back. All right. Are we back? Perfect. All right. So we are back from our recess. It's 2:01 p.m. We will get back in. We voted. Okay, we're good. So I lost track of what we're doing. All right, it is budget time. So we are on now to item 5C, and this is the fiscal year 22-23 budget. So always exciting to see this. This is great. I think, Anna, shall I turn it over to you to go through, or do you want to do a line by line, or who's gonna walk us through what we're gonna do here?
Sure, I'll go ahead and walk us through. And as I'm going to try to go ahead and go through the items that we see the most material impact on.
Sure, perfect.
But if at any point I skip over an item that you find important, please feel free to kind of say, pause, address this,
Right.
and then we'll take it from there.
Sounds good.
Just to kind of give it a little bit of an introduction, we worked in consultation with Ian and Christy, who were a tremendous help to Nikki and I in establishing our 22-23 budget. And so with this, you'll see that we have a new breakdown that breaks out general funds, donations and grants, capital projects, and CFD funds. So we just thought it ideal to go ahead and break out the different types of funding the district receives, and then work as far as allocating those expenditures accordingly. So to lead off on page 23 of our packets, we have our general funds. And so these are generally funds allocated from Los Angeles and earned via library operations. And so in looking at line item 2, we see property taxes and assessments. It looks like we're projected at a 2% increase. And that's also exclusive to our interest income, also primarily earned through the city. In terms of other revenues, that's primarily coming from our E-rate rebate. Just to kind of give a little bit more of a background in terms of, I understand that there's, that's sort of like a general category. So I just wanted to make sure that we all understood what that is. I just want to take a quick pause. Do we have any questions with respects to general fund revenues?
No, I think what was our, sorry, I'm looking real quick.
Sure.
What was our actual for as of where we are right now on property taxes?
Where we are right now, we're currently at, we have our projected amount. In terms of where we are live, we're still closing March. We should have those figures by the next board meeting. If that's okay to kind of get back to you on that figure.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just,
Okay.
if I'm recalling, basically we ended up a little bit higher than we sort of projected. Is that basically right? I don't need the exact number, but I'm making sure my memory on this is correct, that we projected flat for this for 21-22 and we came in higher, or we had projected 2% and we came in higher.
We projected 2% and we came in
Okay.
higher. I think we came in
Okay.
closer to
Okay.
3. Is that right, Ian?
That's correct. Well,
Okay.
yeah, and the budget that you see there was already adjusted for what we actually received. And Christy and I took a look at it and noticed that there is a little bit of extra receipts that trickle in revenues towards April, May and June. So we
Right.
are projecting a bit higher still.
Okay. Great. That's all I wanted to know. Thanks. I'm good on revenues. They look good to me.
Okay, perfect. Moving on to salaries. This was taking into consideration the 5% COLA. So these figures will be updated with the new 7%. So definitely good news. So thank you for that. Moving on to the benefits sector, what you'll primarily see the total amount go up by is our UAL minimum payment. You'll see that we see an increase. So again, this is still our minimum for the fiscal year, but it is about 30,000 higher than prior year. So that's the primary increase you're seeing there. And then moving on to operating expenses, we see an increase related to our trustee election for the upcoming fiscal year. We also see a decrease in our line, let me double check that, our line 29 related to our Xerox printer purchase. So we do see a decrease in that overall monthly amount. We pay $2,200 monthly currently for our lease. So with respects to making that purchase, we are saving a pretty good chunk of change. Do we have any questions here? Can I move on to professional services?
I'm good, Camila.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Yeah.
With respects to professional services, total line on line 42, we see a decrease primarily from Ide Bailey transitioning to an advisory role. So they're
not that we don't love Ide Bailey, but
Love them.
We do.
Yeah, we love you.
Yeah, we're going to continue to love them this new fiscal year. They're going to be overseeing a lot of our work, but it's just bringing in the operation finance function in-house is where we see the decrease there. So I just wanted to go ahead and celebrate the news. Moving on to library materials on line 59. Nothing dramatic here, pretty comparable to last year. We see a little bit more of an emphasis on our downloadables, or we should be.
Yep.
Also, in terms of programming, on line 67, we see a little bit of an increase there, and that's primarily due to coming back to normal operations. And
sorry, just real quick. So downloadables, this is line 52. Should that number be higher? Because it looks like it's the same.
Yeah, it is. We're gonna go ahead and
I can comment on that.
yeah.
It was adjusted at some point, I think at mid-year. So it was quite a bit lower as we started fiscal year 21, 22. So that is reflecting like what we're spending actually.
Got it. So we're going to stay consistent with that.
Yeah. Like we ended up pulling money from the DVD and video game budget and a couple other places. And again, I could even see that number growing and shifting away from books, especially as we're moving towards renovating.
Yeah.
So we're keeping a really close eye on what we're spending for electronic versus print for sure.
Sure. Okay. That makes sense for me.
Good question though.
So in terms of where we end on page 24, line 74, we see that we're positioned to increase our reserve by 10,000. Again,
although probably not anymore.
Yeah. We'll recirculate this with a 7% increase.
Okay.
Great. Moving on to page 25 for donations and grants. So these are funds that we are confirmed to receive from our private donors and also grants awarded. This does not account for anything applied for. We wanted to just estimate based off of confirmed amounts.
Sure.
So this is a really nice breakout of our consistent donors. We have the foundation and friends, which we see are pretty close in amounts to prior fiscal year. The emergency connectivity fund. Actually, I'm sorry, I bypassed the literacy services, but our literacy is close to the same amount. We see a little bit of an increase in this upcoming fiscal year. Moving on to the emergency connectivity fund. This is taking into account 12 hotspots only. And the reason why we see a decrease is prior year, we applied for some laptop replacements. And because those have an extended life, we won't be needing them for this upcoming fiscal year. Moving on to line 7, we have our expanding our footprint. This was a grant that was awarded this fiscal year. Not all funds have been used and not all of them will be used by then. So we have a bit of a carryover situation. So that's why you see such a significant amount rolling into the next fiscal year. So this is money received this fiscal year, but not used until the upcoming fiscal year, just to kind of bring some clarity there.
Are the numbers for the foundation and the friends, are those confirmed with them, I guess is what I'm asking? Are they, that's
Yes.
what they told us they wanted? Okay, great.
The friends, it might even be a little bit higher. When I went to their board meeting last Saturday, they try to give us 50% of what's in their account, and they were over 44,000, but they still have a book sale this month. So it may be a bigger number than that. We'll see, but this is just like a number that we can feel comfortable putting on the report.
Yeah. Okay.
Mhm.
Cool. I've got a question later on, so I'm gonna save it. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So in terms of wages, this is primarily related to our literacy program. We allocate funds accordingly there. We see a little bit of an increase just because we have just more of an effort being put in toward that grant. In terms of operating expenses, we see that we have a significant amount in vehicles and equipment on line 16. That's primarily related to vending machine purchase and maintenance of that new machinery into the new fiscal year.
And the van.
The van, correct.
Yeah, and purchasing a second vehicle is coming out of that line too.
Moving on to programs, we see an overall increase of $10,000. This is related to our adult services and all ages. So adult services is primarily our second Saturday events. So we just wanted to go ahead and allocate additional funds because we're just seeing an increase in costs in terms of securing talent for those events.
Yeah.
All ages programs, we thought it'd be a good idea to implement to include all inclusive community efforts on that side that aren't necessarily age targeted.
Yeah.
Okay.
Information technology, these are primarily funded through our expanding our footprint and emergency connectivity funds.
What is the website development piece? Is that an in-house cost, or is that a vendor cost, or is that what is that?
It was part of the grant application for the $250,000 we got through the California State Library. We felt like rebuilding the website is going to be important to the expanding of our footprint, especially as people are going to have to access us digitally.
Sure.
Whether or not that full amount is going to be expended we'll see. I mean, it was part of what we included in the grant, but this was prior to David starting when we wrote that application. He's convinced that we don't need to do a complete overhaul. So he's continuing to work with Bryn. The priority is definitely streamlining and getting the website moving a little faster. There's a lot of like back end widgets and stuff. So I'm not sure if we'll fully expend it on the website, but that's definitely one of our priorities this next year.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you.
Yep.
So I think this is great. It was occurring to me as we were looking at this sort of different approach that we have to the layout, that basically if we had no donations, no grants, we would only be able to do what we have on our general fund operating. And that this space, I'm just sort of thinking about how we translate this for folks, right? But like this represents what we're able to do beyond that because of people's support, because of grants that we've received. I think it's if that's correct, I think it's a really helpful way to lay it out. It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I also think it doesn't make our budget look like it goes up 300,000 and then back down. You know, that was really one of my big goals, because when we approached 2021, 22, that we had gotten a $350,000 grant to do the IT infrastructure the year before, and it made it look like our budget dropped. So I do also appreciate that it shows the effort that's going into, as well as, you know, from our support groups and our staff to apply for grants. But yeah, all of the additional things we can purchase and services we can provide because of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think it's such a helpful way to do it. I really appreciate it. It makes so much more sense. Okay, I don't have anything else on this. Camila, anything?
No.
Okay.
Moving on to capital project funds on page 26. This includes carryover of funds of our bond proceeds into the upcoming fiscal year to use towards the renovations of both buildings. So on line 2 of page 26, you'll see our bond amount received in column 8. You'll see that amount in column C for this fiscal year as 0, and that's primarily because we were funded in full. But on line 3, you'll see projected interest income on those bond proceeds.
And is that based on the return if we go all in with LAIF, or because I know that was a question we talked about at our board meeting last month?
Sure. Ian, would you like to?
Yeah, they're actually held in a custodial account in US Bank. So
Okay.
I'm not sure if they're able to be moved over into LAIF. I don't think those funds are able to move.
We haven't looped you in on this, but yeah, we're going to be investing in either LAIF and Treasury to get a higher percentage.
Okay.
So that number could potentially grow for sure.
Yeah,
that's the least it would be, I think.
Yeah, that's the least it
right?
would be. Yeah.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. Which is great. Okay.
So moving on to line 13, these are primarily administrative related costs to the bonds. And so what we have here is in column B, you'll see a little bit more of a breakdown, but really because these costs haven't been fully projected at the time of establishing the budget, we went ahead and allocated projected costs at a comparable amount in the contingencies line that encompasses most services aside from our project management.
Wait a second. Oh, I get it. So rather than putting it in as an itemized thing, you've just dropped it all down to a contingency, and then it'll kind of shake out how it shakes. I mean, that's fine. Sure. Yeah. Like, you could probably collapse it into administration and management anyway. You know what I mean? Like, I get why they're separate, but that makes sense. Okay.
And then moving over to line 15, you'll see the Bob Lucas amount projected at 2.5 million. And renovation is expected to begin January 2023. All of this is reliant on timing and just making sure that we have the appropriate permits and licenses at the time of start. But this number has been worked on with our project management team over at Rockland. So we did get their input in terms of this figure that's being presented.
Nikki, is that 2.5? Does that align with what Mark has? Have we gotten numbers back from Mark? Like, are those his updated numbers for Bob Lucas?
This is based on when we were talking about investing the bond proceeds, we asked Jennifer from Rockland to put together a projected bond pulling down of proceeds. So this number was based on what she's predicting we're going to spend next fiscal.
Got it. Okay, perfect. So that's helpful.
Not a perfect science for sure.
Yeah. Right. Well, and we won't
projecting
capture all
during
the
the
Bob
next
Lucas
fiscal.
expenses in the next fiscal anyway, because we'll have
most
half
of them.
Yeah. Okay.
The main library was projected on line 16 as $1 million. And these are primarily related to permits and design before renovations begin.
Yeah.
Moving on to our capital reserves, line 25. You'll see that by the end, we'll have $17.8 million left in reserves. Again, because we were fully funded, we're going to see this number decrease as each fiscal year kind of passes us by.
But could potentially be bigger if we invest differently. So
Right. Correct.
Yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Okay.
So moving on.
I'm sorry. Ian, I feel like you explained this to me last time. I need you to explain it again. Can you remind me how this whole use of addition to reserves, line 20, thing works?
Of course. So we did actually try to present it a little bit differently than we have in past years as well.
Okay.
So I keep changing it up on you, but
Okay.
let's go through this one more time. So we decided to put it at the bottom of the budget now to show
Mhm.
how we're balancing the budget with reserves, or is money going to be put back into reserves? So just looking at the capital here, or maybe a better place to look would be the general fund, but let's stay on the capital since we're here.
Mhm.
Let's look at 21, 22. Since we had a huge influx of bond proceeds on line 1, we have, column A, sorry. We have a net revenue of about that much, 22.2 million, right? Saying we got all this
Mhm.
money in this year. And then line 20 basically tucks it away to reserves, or says we're pulling out of reserves to fund the deficit if there is one. So
Right.
that line is basically balancing your budget, saying we need to pull from reserves, or we're going to put money back into reserves. And we added a box at the bottom that kind of shows what's actually happening from a cash standpoint. So
Right.
23 is saying we're going to use 700,000 and draw it. Line 23 is your beginning. 24 is a drawdown of the proceeds. And then 25 is where you're going to end the year and what's left.
Right. Right. That seems reasonable to me. I think where I get confused is in line 20. I misread that as like general fund reserves rather than capital reserves.
These are completely segregated, and they are
Yeah.
on every schedule. So this is
Yeah.
just really the debt proceeds, interest on those proceeds. And eventually, I know Nikki's discussed about going out for grants in the future. We could also include this in the capital fund as well if they ever occurred.
Right. Because they would be restricted to only capital uses. Okay. That works for me. That's very helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
Okay, moving on to page 27, our CFD fund. These are our special assessment funds related to property taxing to equip and maintain the Altadena Library within boundaries of the district. So we're projected at $878,500 to be received as reflected on line 2, column C. And in terms of debt service, interest payable, and this is attributable to our bond interest expense at a 5% rate, we're noticing the same amount as expensed. So you see the same amount coming in, same amount going out. So that's why we're reflecting a net zero impact to reserves there. Yep. That concludes the budget piece. I'm happy to address any questions.
I think this looks great. Fantastic job, guys. I mean, I know how much time goes into this whole process, but I also just really commend you on spending so much time thinking about the structure of all of it, because I feel like usually when we go through this process, it's like, wait, what is this thing? Why is it here? How does it? But I don't have any of those questions this time. I'm like, okay, yeah, that makes sense. This looks great.
Yeah, I'm much happier with the funds being broken out separately.
It just feels so much cleaner.
Yep.
There's no more of this like craziness. Yeah, I think this all looks really good. I don't have any issues. I just, I'm good to send this to the board as is with the adjustment to that, salary number. But otherwise, I think it looks really solid.
I do have one comment, Anna and Christy and Nikki. I think we can update the CFD revenues. We got a rough estimate from NBS, right?
Yep.
Okay.
So this was like a guesstimate, sort of.
Well, basically, Christy and I knew we were going to collect at least what the debt service was. So we just threw that on here to get a draft out, but we heard back from NBS, so I think we can update that.
What is that? Is it, do we have a sense of what that number is going to be?
It was over $1 million. I want to say one in the 1.2 to 1.5 range. I can look at the email.
Okay.
But
And that's
again,
about 4% or 4 cents per square foot rather, or whatever it was we ended up
and that was
assessing
just
for this year.
yeah, that was just an estimate. They're going to give us an even more definite number later on.
Okay.
Yeah, it's 1,247,000 for 22-23.
What happens if we have more money than we owe? Do we just pay down our principal?
So the debt service is more than what you're seeing on next year's budget, because this next year we're only paying interest, and interest and principal will happen in 23-24.
Okay.
So actually the debt service is more in that range. And I think eventually the CFD was formed to where we can use some of that for operations if we need it, right, Nikki?
Yeah.
So,
It's gonna replace the parcel tax in 25, 26.
Yeah.
Mhm. And that's when it'll be closer to the 10 cents per square foot.
That's right. That's
That'll-
right.
Yeah.
Okay. Great. Okay. Any other questions or anything else we want to talk about on the budget? I think this is awesome. Okay, then I will ask for a motion to, hang on, we're not actually doing it, we're recommending. I'm going to ask for a motion that the Budget Committee recommend that the Board of Trustees adopt the fiscal year 22-23 budget with the minor amendments we've talked about at their next meeting.
So moved.
I'll second that, and we'll take a roll call vote. Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And an aye vote for me. Great job, guys. This is awesome.
Yay.
Yay.
Thank you.
All right. So now we are on to item 5D, which is our updated financial policies. Wow. I don't think I've ever seen these in one place before. This is really exciting. They look great. Who wants to talk a little bit about these?
I'll start, and then if Christy
Okay.
wants to add anything, she can.
Great.
So it's been one of my goals since I started, which today, as of yesterday, was 2.5 years ago, by the way.
No, congratulations.
And we tackled the personnel policies last year. So I reached out to Eide Bailey. As you know, I've been working really closely with them for about the last year. And they connected me with Christy, who's done quite a bit of financial policy updating for other organizations. We did start with our policies, but kind of threw most of them out the window. As you know, they haven't been updated since 2009. So we didn't provide a redlined copy because it would have been page after page after page of content removed. One of the things that Christy did point out when we were going through them was that there was a lot of procedural information in the policies, which really, we don't want to have to go to the board every time we change like a line item number or something like that. It was really like a lot of information that was not necessary to be in the policies. So as I included in my report, we did add some of the updated policies, which include the investment policy, which was approved last in 2019, the debt policy, which was the debt, the disclosure, and the tax policies, which we developed, of course, to be able to do the bond issuance back in August of 2021. So all of those are incorporated in. And then as long as the board approves the unfunded accrued liability policy later this month, we will also add that to the financial policies as well. So we met a couple times, Ian, Christy, Anna, and I reviewed them, made some tweaks and adjustments, but are curious to hear if there's questions that the trustees have or comments or feedback that you'd like to see us include. Christy, do you have anything you want to add?
No, other than this is a lot easier to manage in this format because you're not mixing it in with things that are internal and that are constantly changing. The point of having a policy is to have something to refer to make sure that you're doing things the way the board is is expecting. So no, this is good.
I guess the one other thing I will point out is we went back and forth a little bit on records retention. Because we do, as you know, Katie, I believe it was approved in 2019. There was a new records retention schedule that got approved. And then there were records in this policy, and we went back and forth a little bit about whether or not we keep a records retention related to finance policy versus, or finance records. And we all ended up agreeing that it wouldn't make sense to have two different schedules. Because like there's a little bit of a debate about what is considered finance records versus not. I mean, so we ended up deciding to just put in the policy that if people had questions, they would refer to the records retention policy or schedule that we already have. So we didn't include that. And I just wanted to point that out as well.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I don't, unless are there any outliers like financial records that would need to be retained like way beyond the lifespan of the, I mean, like, is there anything the records retention policy doesn't cover that feels problematic? Yeah.
No. What we ended up doing is we were going through like, yeah, that sounds like finance, but then there would be debate about like, why didn't you include this? I would consider that a finance record. So we just decided it was much cleaner to just have one schedule that we would refer people to from this policy.
Sure. That makes a lot of sense. Okay. Yeah, I think these look great. I totally agree. It's so much easier to figure out what's going on. The only real question I had on any of this is around a reserve policy. So, and this is page, sorry.
33.
Yeah, that's right. So we specify an operating reserve. I wonder if it's worth adding a paragraph here that says, you know, basically at the discretion of the board, the district may maintain other reserves as well. Because I'm thinking about like our capital reserve, I'm thinking about this 115 trust. Like we're starting to enter a world where we do kind of have multiple functional reserves other than just our big operating reserves. And I wonder if it's worth including that.
I don't think that's a bad idea, just to add the sentence or two that says you may maintain or, you know, it gives you room to do that eventually. Because at this point in time, there are no other required reserves. This one happens to actually be a requirement, you know, not just from the board, but from outside.
State California, like, we have to do it by law. That's right.
Yeah,
because I think we should add a sentence to that effect, basically. You know, and I don't think it needs to be specific to purpose, but like, you know, the board may at its discretion maintain additional reserves to support the efforts of the district, or, you know, liabilities or undertakings of the district, or whatever it is. Because I do want to eventually see us get to a place where, like, you know, we've built these buildings, we're fixing these buildings, they're great, but we have a capital reserve as well, so that, you know, we're not 20 years down the line going like, oh no, they need a new roof. We could not have possibly foreseen that. And I think just saying that that's permissible is good.
That's great.
Anything else? So with some of these, we bring the budget, we bring the reserve policy to the board annually. What's the thinking behind that? Do we imagine that it's going to change dramatically year over year?
It's that it will be reviewed annually. Yeah, as part of the budget process. And if you look like the different sections, there are different recommendations. Like investment policy is supposed to come to the board every year. But again, I think it's not necessarily that we have to bring it and get it approved or updated, but that it should be reviewed on that schedule in case there are adjustments that need to be made.
Okay. Yeah, because it looks like contracts and purchasing are every 5.
Yeah, it's just prudent that they at least be reviewed. It shows that you're managing them and that you're aware of them. They're not just sitting out like these kind of were since 2009, you know, just sitting over on the sidelines. It just demonstrates. And you're right, there's a few of them that are so unlikely to change that's why they're in there at every 3 or 5 years. I think we used 1, 3, and 5 for our numbers, didn't we?
Yeah.
Is there anything
Yeah.
beyond that? Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Investments.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
Well, no, I was thinking like investments, that is, it may not change, but that is something that there are requirements beyond either that you determine or
Yeah.
that your outside parties determine have to be done. So the ones that are at 1 year that's just prudent to do so.
Okay, I love that. We add it to our board calendar and do it every year. I think that's great. Let me just look back through and see if I have any. I think that's all of my questions. I thought this all looked really good. Camila, anything? Okay.
No.
Let me just see. I did have a on our kind of capitalization criteria and processes. I guess I'm wondering about how we, and maybe this is not a policy question, maybe this is an execution question, but like, when do we start depreciating things like improvements versus in progress? Do you know what I mean? Like, if we're fixing these buildings and we put on a new roof, I guess my question is, are we depreciating elements of the facility at different rates, or is it the improved value as a whole, or how does that kind of work on a capitalization front?
I can add a couple of comments and then let you add to it. But this is one of the things why we will have a separate schedule that they'll be keeping on everything that's done, because we don't want to have one capital asset at the end called improvement,
Right.
renovation.
Right.
So there will be items that will remain in, construction in progress for quite some time until we deem that it's done. But if there are separate items that we know are complete, they'll move from that CIP right over to a fixed asset and start depreciating. We just have to determine what those items are. The budget at this point, or at least what I've seen, or we've got the 2 lines for the main library and the Bob Lucas library. We don't have anything. We're not at that point yet for construction where we've got it down to those levels. But I imagine that's the schedule you'll be keeping, and we'll be monitoring that. So at least on an annual basis, if not otherwise for your audit, you will bring items into fixed assets. They will not all wait till the end.
Okay, good. Good. All right. Okay. Anything else we want to add on this, or anything else we want to talk about in financial policies? I think these are also terrific, and thank you guys so much for putting these together in such a coherent and organized way. I think that's going to be so much easier for the board to understand and to refer back to as well. And I love that it's so nice that all of our policies actually match, like, what a world.
What a concept.
What a concept. Has not always been the case. All right. So I'm going to ask for a motion that the committee recommend approval of the new district financial policies to the board for their meeting for their next meeting.
Well done, and so moved.
All right. And I second. Let's take a roll call vote. Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And I vote for me. All right. Very nice. Okay. Let me come back to my agenda. Excuse me. All right. So next up is item 5E. That's our budget committee meeting schedule for fiscal year 22-23. And basically the plan is that we would meet quarterly on the first Thursday of the month of the quarter, right?
Yep.
Yes.
At 1 o'clock, as long as that
At 1
still
o'clock.
works for both of you too. That's what we've been doing this fiscal year, so.
Yeah. Does that work for you, Camila? Okay, great. Perfect. And we can always call additional meetings if we need to, but those are sort of Standing meetings. All right. So I'm going to ask for a motion to approve the budget committee meeting schedule.
Moved.
Seconded. We'll take a roll call vote. Trustee Wilkerson.
Aye.
And I vote for me. That looks great. And I'll put all those dates on my calendar. And then last up, item 5F. This looks like it's just an informational item about LAFCO. We're going to pay them a little bit more money this year than we have in years previous because everything costs a little bit more.
Yep.
A whole $85 more?
$84. I'm not
Sorry,
sending that extra dollar to
$84.
LAFCO. Keeping it.
I will point out that last year they did not increase their budget at all. So we had no fiscal impact. So really, we're only spending $42 for the past 2 years.
That's a good way to look at it, Nikki.
I love it.
You know.
That's great. That's great. All right. And we don't need to take any action on this. It's just a recommendation. Okay. All right. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of our new business. That was a ton of stuff, guys. Awesome.
Well done.
Whew. Yeah. Well done to all of you who prepared all of it because it made our job really easy.
I'm going to say I strapped in for a 3-hour meeting this afternoon, and good job, everyone.
No, this is terrific. Well, and I really mean it. I do think it's because a lot of the structure of how you guys are presenting stuff, it just makes a ton of sense. And so then we don't have to try to deduce that structure and spend many hours of our lives because you've done all of that for us, which is deeply appreciated.
Most appreciated.
Okay. So any future agenda items? I don't have any. No.
None for me.
All right. Okay. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Ooh, I'll second it. All right. Any objection? Hearing none, we are adjourned at 2:42 p.m. That does it for us. Thank you so much, guys. That was great.
Katie, can
Thank
I
you.
and
Nice
Nikki,
meeting everyone.
Katie and Nikki, can I ask you a question after they stop the
Sure.
meeting
Sure.
for
Yeah,
the next meeting?
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay, I think Christy and myself are going to jump off. You guys have a good one.
Thank you guys
Yeah,
so
thank
much.
you.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
really appreciate it. Thank you.